Where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments below. Before we dive in, subscribe so you never miss the bravest dog stories we share. On a snow-choked night at Chicago's Union Station, thousands rushed past, blind to danger. A black and tan German shepherd named Ranger stopped cold, eyes locked on a scuffed gray suitcase. Inside the crowd's noise, a tiny, terrified sound slipped out, like a child fighting to breathe. Somewhere nearby, a man who wasn't afraid of violence tightened his jaw and stepped in. Ethan Cole, a former Navy SEAL, moved with a bad knee and a calm that scared predators. Ranger didn't bark. He warned, silent and absolute, as if something ruthless was close. Subscribe, comment, and share to see justice served. The suitcase nobody claimed. Winter pressed against Chicago like a cold palm, turning every breath into smoke and every street into glass. Union Station swallowed sound and spat it back out as noise. Announcements echoed off stone. Boots scuffed slush into gray puddles. People moved with the same look in their eyes Ethan Cole had seen in evacuation lines overseas, a restless mix of impatience and fear. Except here, it wore scarves and carried coffee. Ethan stood just inside the Great Hall, shoulders squared beneath a navy winter parka that fell to mid-thigh. A red and black plaid flannel peeked at the collar. Faded jeans creased at the knees. Brown leather boots planted him steady on the slick floor, even if his left knee always felt one wrong step away from lighting up like fire. He hated crowds, not because they were loud, but because they were easy to hide in. Ranger moved at his side like a shadow that had decided to protect him. The German shepherd was 5 years old, black along the back with warm tan on the legs and face, ears upright and always listening. His amber-brown eyes didn't beg for attention. They worked. He wasn't the kind of dog that wasted energy on panic, and he wasn't the kind that barked for entertainment. Ranger watched. Ranger measured. Ranger remembered. Ethan's hand stayed near Ranger's shoulder without touching, close enough to guide him if needed. It was an old habit, the way you kept a teammate in your peripheral vision without looking directly at them. A gust of wind punched through the revolving doors. Snowflakes swirled in like tiny fugitives before melting on the heated air. Somewhere, a toddler cried. Somewhere else, a man laughed too loudly. Ethan didn't like either sound. He was only here because the weather had pushed every schedule into chaos. He had planned to be out of the city before dusk, driving west to check on a friend who never asked for help even when he needed it. But the roads had closed, and the station had become the only warm place to wait without paying for a hotel. Ranger's nose twitched at a dozen stories at once. He tracked the oily scent of fried food drifting from a vendor. He caught the sharp bite of disinfectant. He registered the metallic tang of wet rail and old coins. Most people thought dogs smelled good or bad. Ranger smelled truth. Ethan found a spot near a column where he could see the main benches, the ticket counters, and the corridor that led to the restrooms. It was the kind of position that didn't look like a position. He looked like any tired man in winter gear. That was how he preferred it. A woman in her late 50s hurried by, short and round-shouldered, silver hair pulled into a tight bun under a knit hat. She clutched a tote bag like it was a life vest. She glanced at Ethan's face for half a second, then looked away quickly, as if eye contact might become a problem. A teenager, maybe 16, lanky with messy dark curls spilling from a hooded sweatshirt, leaned against a wall, scrolling his phone. His jaw bounced like he was chewing on a secret. Then Ranger changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no growl, no bark, no sudden lunge. Ranger simply stopped walking. His body went still, weight shifting forward, ears angling like antennae. Ethan felt it before he looked down. A dog like Ranger didn't freeze for nothing. "What is it?" Ethan murmured, voice low enough that it barely existed. Ranger didn't glance back. His gaze locked on the seating area near the Lost and Found sign. Beneath a row of plastic chairs sat a hard-shell suitcase, scuffed and gray, its handle half extended like it had tried to stand up and couldn't. At first glance, it looked like every other piece of abandoned luggage in a busy station. People left things behind all the time. People also left traps behind. Ethan had learned that lesson the hard way. He followed Ranger's stare. There was no frantic owner scanning the benches, no crying parent, no obvious commotion. Just motion, constant motion, bodies flowing around that suitcase like a river around a rock. Ranger's nose dipped once, barely an inch, and then lifted again. His jaw clenched. His breathing slowed. Ethan's heartbeat didn't spike. It narrowed. That same cold focus slid into place, the one that used to show up in the seconds before a door got kicked in. He started toward the suitcase, careful with his left knee. Ranger moved with him, close and quiet. A voice cut across the space. "Hey, sir!" Officer Dana Ruiz stepped into Ethan's path. She looked early 30s, average height, athletic build, and she wore her winter police jacket zipped up to her chin. Her dark hair was tucked under a cap, and her face had that sharp, sleep-deprived professionalism of someone who had spent too many winters managing too many problems. "Station's a mess tonight," she said, tone polite but firm. "We've already had people report that bag. It's been there for hours." Ethan kept his eyes on the suitcase. "Has anyone claimed it?" Ruiz shook her head. "No. Lost and Found logged it. We're stretched thin, okay? Trains are delayed, temp is dropping, folks are getting cranky." Ranger didn't look at her. He didn't care about policies. He cared about what was real. Ethan finally turned his head, meeting Ruiz's eyes. "My dog doesn't stop like this for forgotten luggage." Ruiz's gaze flicked to Ranger. She saw the rigid posture, the locked focus. Her expression tightened, a crack in the routine night mask. "What kind of dog is he?" she asked, quieter now. "He's the kind that warns me before something bad happens," Ethan said. A man in a reflective volunteer vest walked past, mid-40s, thin face, pale blonde hair tucked under a beanie. He pushed a cart of blankets and smiled at a couple huddled near the wall. His cheer looked practiced, like he'd rehearsed it in a mirror. Ethan watched him for a second too long. The man didn't notice, or pretended not to. Ruiz shifted her weight. "You law enforcement?" Ethan shook his head. "Not anymore." Something in his voice must have answered the real question anyway. Ruiz exhaled through her nose. "Okay," she said. "We do this smart. No hero stuff." Ethan almost smiled. "Smart is my favorite kind." Ruiz keyed her radio and spoke fast, controlled. "I need a supervisor at Lost and Found, and medical on standby. Possible child situation." Her eyes widened slightly after she said it, like she didn't want the words to be true. Ethan crouched a few feet from the suitcase, careful not to jostle it. The hard-shell case was scratched, one corner dented. A baggage tag dangled, but the printed name looked smeared, like it had been handled with wet gloves. Ranger stepped forward and placed himself between Ethan and the suitcase, not aggressively, but with purpose. His ears stayed high. His amber eyes didn't blink. Ethan leaned closer, not touching. He listened. At first, all he heard was Union Station being Union Station. The hiss of wet coats, the squeak of rolling wheels, a distant argument about refunds. Then, beneath it, something else. A thin sound, not a cry, not even a whimper, more like breath trying not to be breath. Ethan's throat tightened. He lowered his head until his ear was near the zipper seam. Ranger's presence pressed into the moment like a silent shield. Ruiz knelt beside Ethan, her gloved hand hovering near her holster. "Do you hear that?" Ethan whispered. Ruiz's face went pale. "Oh my God." Ranger didn't bark. He didn't need to. The warning was in his stillness, in the way his body formed a barrier, in the absolute certainty in his eyes. Ethan reached out, fingers closing around the zipper pull. Just as the zipper cracked open a tiny gap, Ranger pressed in closer, eyes locked on the suitcase like he was guarding something that must not get out. And beneath the station announcements, Ethan heard a sound so small from inside that cold shot straight down his spine. The door behind the crowd. The zipper slid another inch, and the world narrowed to a thin, trembling gap. Ethan kept his hands steady. His left knee complained the way it always did when he crouched too long, but he didn't shift his weight. Movement meant noise. Noise meant attention. And attention was exactly what whoever left this suitcase wanted to avoid. Ranger pressed closer, shoulders tight, ears upright. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply held his ground like a silent warning sign that only predators could read. Officer Dana Ruiz's flashlight cut into the suitcase, a pale beam shaking just slightly. She swallowed, then steadied herself. "Easy," she whispered, like the suitcase could hear her. Ethan widened the opening. A small face appeared in the dark, pale and damp with sweat. A child's eyes, huge with panic, blinked against the sudden light. Tiny hands, shaking, reached toward the gap, and then stopped, as if afraid the air itself might hurt. "Hey," Ethan said softly. "You're okay. You're okay." The child tried to breathe quietly and failed. A faint, broken sound slipped out. Ruiz's voice snapped into command mode. "Medical, now!" Ethan didn't yank the suitcase open. He unlatched it the way he'd disarm a pressure plate, slow and controlled. Ranger's nose hovered near the seam, pulling in information Ethan couldn't. When the case finally opened, there was no explosion, no contraband, no obvious weapon. Just a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 2. Blonde hair stuck to her forehead. Her cheeks were blotched from crying. A strip of tape had been pressed across her mouth at some point and ripped off poorly, leaving red marks on her skin. She wore a puffy pink jacket that was too thin for Chicago winter and socks without shoes. Ruiz made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite anger. "Oh, God." Ethan's jaw tightened. He forced himself to keep his hands gentle. He slid his arms under the child and lifted her carefully, checking her breathing, the way you check someone after a blast. Her body was warm, which meant she hadn't been in there all day. That was both relief and a new kind of fear. "She's cold and dehydrated," Ethan said, "but she's alive." Ranger stepped in close and sniffed the girl's hair, her jacket, her small fists. Then he turned his head sharply toward the suitcase again, as if the suitcase was still shouting something the humans couldn't hear. "Ranger says there's more," Ethan murmured. Ruiz blinked. "More what?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. He lowered the girl onto a bench and used his own gloved hands to block the worst of the air while Ruiz shrugged off her outer jacket and wrapped it around the child. A paramedic team pushed through the crowd moments later, a man and a woman, both mid-30s, faces worn by too many emergencies. The woman leaned in, voice calm and trained. "Sweetheart, can you tell me your name?" The girl's lips trembled. No words came. Her eyes darted to Ranger, and she clung to Ruiz's sleeve like it was a rope. Ethan stepped aside, letting the professionals work. He didn't leave, though. He watched the flow of people around them, scanning faces the way he used to scan rooftops. Someone would be watching. You didn't hide a child in a suitcase and then walk away like it was nothing. Ruiz spoke into her radio again, voice tight. "We have a living child. I need CPD and FBI notified. Now. Lock down cameras. I want eyes on every exit." A small commotion flared near the ticket counters. Ethan glanced over. A man in a reflective volunteer vest stood there for a heartbeat, too still, too aware. Mid-40s, thin face, pale blonde hair under a beanie. The same man Ethan had noticed earlier pushing blankets. Their eyes met. The man's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Calculation. A quick mental exit route. He turned and melted into the crowd. Ethan's instincts snapped like a trap. "Ruiz," Ethan said low. "That vest, the blanket guy, he just clocked us." Ruiz followed Ethan's gaze, then cursed under her breath. "I saw him earlier." Ethan didn't run. Running spooks prey and predators in different ways. Instead, he moved like he belonged, weaving through the crowd with Ranger at his knee. The man in the vest cut left toward a corridor marked "Staff Only." Ethan's knee protested as he picked up speed, but he didn't show it. He shortened his stride, kept his center of gravity low. Ranger stayed silent, moving with eerie precision. The man pushed through the staff door. Ethan reached it 2 seconds later. Ruiz's voice crackled in his ear from the radio she'd shoved into his hand. "Sir, do not go into restricted." Ethan pressed the talk button once. "I'm not a sir, and he's not a volunteer." He slipped through the door. The noise of the station died behind them, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of industrial cleaner. The corridor was narrower, painted a tired beige, lined with utility panels and warning signs. Ranger's nose dropped to the floor. Then he veered right, toward a side passage Ethan wouldn't have noticed. The dog moved with purpose now, tail low, shoulders tight. Not aggressive, focused. They turned a corner and found the end of the hall, a metal service door with a keypad. The man in the vest was gone, but the air still held him. Ranger froze again. Not the same freeze as before. This one was sharper, like a knife held still. Ethan knelt, ignoring the ache in his knee, and listened. No footsteps, no voices, just the building breathing through vents. Ranger sniffed the keypad and then the bottom seam of the door, where cold air leaked through. "Down," Ethan whispered. Ranger's head lifted, eyes fixed. Something was beyond that door. Ethan tested the handle. Locked. He didn't kick it. Kicking announces you. Kicking gets you ambushed. Instead, he scanned the floor and the wall. Small scuff marks near the baseboard. Wet prints, half-dried. A streak of grime where someone's shoulder had rubbed past too fast. He followed the marks back a few steps and found something half-hidden behind a conduit. A cheap disposable phone. The kind you buy with cash and never register. The back was popped off. The battery was missing. "Burner," Ethan muttered. Ranger pawed lightly at a crumpled bundle in the corner. Ethan pulled it free. A janitor's uniform, dark blue, still damp, with a name patch torn off. Ruiz's boots clacked behind them. She appeared at the corner, breath fast, cheeks flushed from the cold and the sprint. "You're insane," she hissed, then saw what Ethan held and went quiet. "Not a volunteer," Ethan said. Ruiz lifted her radio. "We have evidence in the service corridor. Possible disguise, possible burner. I need a supervisor and detectives down here." Her eyes flicked to Ranger. "What's he doing?" Ranger stood at the service door, nose pressed near the seam, drawing in air like he was reading it. Then he stepped back, looked at Ethan, and moved his head once toward the door. A simple signal, a direction. Ethan's stomach tightened. "What's on the other side?" Ruiz whispered. Ethan looked at the keypad, then at the scuffed floor. "Not luggage," he said. "Not lost and found." He reached toward the suitcase tag Ruiz had pulled earlier from evidence, now sealed in a clear bag. It had been smeared, but not completely. Under the false print, there was another layer, faint as a ghost. A sticker. Small, almost invisible. A tracking label. Ruiz stared. "That's not for the bag." Ethan shook his head slowly. "It's for what's inside the bag." Ranger's ears pricked. Somewhere behind the metal door, something shifted. A soft, metallic click, like a latch being moved. Ethan held up one finger to Ruiz, a silent command for stillness. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't need to. The station above them roared with life, but down here, the air felt like it had stopped breathing. And Ethan realized, with a cold certainty, that whoever had taken that child had not left Union Station yet. The map in the noise. The service corridor felt colder than the station above, as if winter had found a crack in the building and crawled inside to wait. Ethan held still, one finger raised between himself and Officer Dana Ruiz. The metal door in front of them looked ordinary, the kind maintenance workers opened 100 times a day without thinking. But the soft click they'd just heard on the other side made it something else entirely. Ranger stood squared to the seam, black back rigid, tan legs planted, ears up like antennas catching a frequency no one else could hear. He didn't growl, he didn't bark. He simply warned with his posture, the quiet kind of warning that made Ethan's skin tighten. Ethan breathed in once and checked the environment the way he used to before a breach. Light source, fluorescent, steady, no strobe. Sound, humming vents, distant crowd noise above. Cover, a utility cabinet 3 steps left, a concrete pillar 2 steps right. Angles, a narrow corridor behind them, one blind corner 20 feet back. He took the right side position by the pillar, giving Ruiz the left. Not because she needed protection, but because it kept both sightlines covered. It was simple geometry. It was how you kept someone from slipping past. Ruiz's eyes flicked to him, reading the decision without needing words. She set her feet and unholstered her flashlight again, grip firm, breath controlled. Another sound came from behind the door. Not a latch this time. Footsteps. Close. Ethan lowered his center of gravity. Left knee protested, but he ignored it. Pain was an old language. He'd learned to translate it into caution instead of panic. The keypad beeped once. The door handle shifted. Ranger stepped back half a pace, making space, as if he knew exactly how fast the door would swing. Ethan's left hand hovered near the edge of the door, not touching. His right stayed open and ready, fingers relaxed. If the person who came through was armed, a tight fist would slow him down. The door cracked open. A man's shoulder appeared first, then a reflective vest, then a pale face under a black beanie. The blanket guy. Mid-40s, thin build, narrow jaw, pale blonde hair visible at the temples, eyes that didn't blink enough. His posture screamed the kind of nervous confidence Ethan recognized, the kind men wore when they thought they were protected by something bigger than themselves. The man froze when he saw Ethan. For half a second, the corridor went silent except for the station's distant roar. Then the man's gaze flicked to Ranger, and the confidence slipped. Not all the way, but enough. "Step back," Ruiz said, voice flat and official. "Hands where I can see them." The man's hands lifted, slow and deliberate. His lips curled like he wanted to talk his way out. "Officer," he began, voice smooth. "I'm just trying to get back to my—" Ethan didn't move, but his eyes tracked the man's right hip, then the left pocket, then the waistband. The small shifts, the micro-tension, the way the man's weight leaned subtly toward the corridor behind him, toward escape. Ranger's ears angled forward. Still no bark, just certainty. "Your badge," Ruiz demanded. "Staff ID, now." The man hesitated. And that was the moment Ethan knew it wasn't improvisation. It was training, just not the good kind. The man suddenly dropped his hands and lunged, not at Ruiz, not at Ethan, but sideways, aiming for the blind angle down the corridor. Ethan moved like a door slamming shut. He pivoted, one step, planted his boots, and caught the man's forearm with a controlled grip. Not a punch, not a tackle, just a hard stop. Ethan used the man's momentum against him, turning the lunge into a stumble. The man hissed and tried to twist free. His left hand shot toward his pocket. Ruiz snapped her flashlight beam down. "Don't!" Ethan tightened his hold and pinned the man's wrist against the wall, using forearm pressure and leverage rather than brute force. The move was clean, economical, and quiet. He kept the man's head from hitting the concrete. He didn't want injury. He wanted information. Ranger stepped in close, chest forward, eyes locked on the man's face. The dog didn't bare teeth. He didn't bark. But something in his stillness made the man's breathing spike, fast and shallow. "Easy," Ethan said, low. Not to the man, to the situation. Hands open. The man's fingers unfurled slowly. Ruiz moved in and cuffed him with practiced speed. "You're done," she said. The man's lips trembled, but he tried to smile anyway. "You don't understand what you're stepping into." Ethan didn't answer. He'd heard that line in too many languages. Ruiz patted the man down quickly and pulled items one by one. A keycard, plain gray, no name. A roll of baggage stickers. A small packet of wipes that smelled sharply chemical. And a folded piece of paper with a number written in block ink. Ruiz stared at the stickers. "These are luggage tags." Ethan shook his head. "These are camouflage." He took the key card from Ruiz's gloved hand and studied it under the flashlight. The edges were worn, not from a wallet, from repeated swipes. Ranger sniffed the man's boots, then turned his head toward the open door behind them, toward whatever space the man had been coming from. The dog's focus tightened again, like a compass needle snapping north. "There's something back there," Ethan murmured. Ruiz's radio crackled with urgent voices. She answered in short bursts, relaying what they had. Her tone was firm, but Ethan caught the tremor underneath it. Not fear for herself. Fear for what else they might find. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. 2 sets, heavier. Backup. Detective Sean O'Neill appeared first, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with a tired face and close-cropped dark hair peppered with gray. He wore a heavy coat over plain clothes, his eyes sharp and skeptical in the way Chicago detectives had earned the right to be. Behind him was Special Agent Kimberly Shaw, late 30s, tall and lean, blonde hair pulled back tight, FBI jacket zipped high. Her gaze swept the hallway, like she was counting exits the way Ethan had. O'Neill looked at Ethan, then at Ruiz. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." Shaw's eyes went to Ranger, then to the man in cuffs. "It's exactly what it is," she said, voice cold. "And it doesn't stop with one suitcase." Ruiz held up the keycard. "We found this, and burner parts, and those tag stickers." Shaw stepped closer, her expression hardening as she took in the details. "Keycards like that get copied and rotated. It's a system." Ethan didn't like the word system. Systems meant scale. Ranger moved to the open service door again and stopped, as if drawing a line on the floor. Shaw watched him for a beat. "Your dog is telling you something." Ethan nodded once. "He's been right all night." O'Neill shifted his stance near the doorway, one hand near his own weapon but not drawing it. Controlled. Professional. Shaw leaned in toward the man in cuffs. "What's behind that door?" The man stared past them, toward the ceiling, as if hoping his luck lived up there. His voice came out thin. "I just move things. That's all." "People aren't things," Ruiz said. The man's eyes flicked to Ranger. His bravado cracked again. "You're too late." Ethan's stomach sank, not because he believed the man, but because he could imagine how that sentence could be true. Shaw's phone buzzed. She glanced down, then looked up with a new kind of focus. "We just got a ping from a tracker," she said. "Not the one you found." Her eyes met Ethan's. "And it's moving." The night train. Shaw's phone screen glowed in the dim corridor. A dot crawled across a map like an insect with purpose. "It's moving," she said again, steady voice, tense eyes. "West service lane, toward the yard." Detective O'Neill exhaled once, slow. "Union Station doesn't have a yard." "Not here," Shaw replied, "but the transfer point does." Ethan felt his left knee throb as he stood. Pain always showed up when the stakes went up, like his body wanted a vote. He ignored it. Ranger's head lifted, ears sharp, as if the word yard carried its own scent. Shaw led them fast, cutting through a staff stairwell and into a security office that smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. A supervisor sat inside, late 50s, heavy-set, gray mustache, eyes tired from a night of delays. His name patch read Hank Mullins. He looked like the kind of man who wanted order in a world that refused to behave. Shaw flashed her badge. "We need access to the transfer cameras, rail and cargo." Mullins didn't argue. He just nodded and started pulling feeds. "What are we looking for?" "A moving tracker," Shaw said, "and the person who thinks no one is watching." Ethan stood behind the monitors where he could see the door and the hallway at the same time. Ranger stayed near his boot, silent, focused. His eyes flicked between the screens and the air, like he knew the difference between what cameras caught and what they missed. On one feed, a service lane outside the station showed snow driving sideways under yellow lights. A forklift moved slowly, tires slipping. Another feed showed a long, fenced lot near the tracks where cargo pallets sat under tarps like sleeping animals. The tracker dot on Shaw's phone kept crawling. O'Neill leaned in. "That's the transfer site by Canal Street, the one with the private loading gate." Mullins pulled up the gate camera. A reflective vest moved through the snow. Not the man in cuffs, another one. This one looked younger, maybe late 20s. Broad chest, shaved head under a hood. Movements too careful for a guy simply doing his job. He pushed a wheeled cart with something long and wrapped, strapped down tight. Ruiz's voice went thin. "That's not luggage." Shaw nodded once. "That's a shipment." Ethan watched the vest worker's hands. No fumbling, no hesitation. Whoever trained him had taught him speed and routine. "Time," Ethan said quietly. "How far is that lot?" 8 minutes in good weather, O'Neill answered. Ethan looked at the screen again. The snow was getting worse. 10, Ethan said. "If we don't drive like idiots." Shaw was already texting. "I'm calling in 2 units. Quiet approach, no sirens. We keep the crowd calm." Mullins swallowed. "There's a kid involved, isn't there?" No one answered, but the silence did. Ethan's mind flashed to the little girl in the suitcase. Lily. The way her eyes had searched for safety and found it in Ranger stillness. He turned to Ruiz. "How is she?" "On the way to Lurie Children's," Ruiz said, voice tight. "Stable. Scared." Ethan nodded once. Stable was a word that could mean everything or nothing. They moved out. O'Neill drove. Ruiz rode front passenger, radio in hand. Shaw sat behind O'Neill, already building the plan in clipped sentences. Ethan sat beside her, the cold seeping through the door, Ranger steady at his feet. "Positions," Shaw said. "O'Neill and Ruiz take left flank by the fence line. Ethan, you and Ranger stay with me on the right. We do not rush the gate. We watch first." Ethan nodded. "We watch the hands. We watch the exits." Ranger's ears stayed up. He didn't pant. He didn't tremble. He just listened, like winter itself was speaking. The transfer lot appeared through the blowing snow, lit by harsh floodlights that made everything look sharper than it was. A chain-link fence wrapped the area like a cage. Beyond it, tracks ran dark and wet. A freight car sat idle, waiting like a mouth. They parked a half-block away. No lights, no door slams. They moved on foot. Ethan's knee sent a warning up his leg, but his boots kept the same rhythm. He stayed low, using stacked pallets as cover. Ranger moved beside him, paws quiet on the snow-crusted asphalt. The dog's black back blended into the shadows. His tan face caught the light only when he turned, quick and precise. Shaw held her phone near her chest, following the tracker dot. 30 yards, she whispered. 20. A forklift engine coughed in the distance. Ethan smelled diesel and cold metal. He also smelled something else, faint under the industrial stink. A sweet shampoo smell. Ranger stopped. His body tightened. His nose angled toward a long, wrapped bundle on a cart near the freight car. Ethan felt the chill hit deeper. "Right there," Shaw breathed. They watched. The vest worker stepped into view. Late 20s, thick neck, hood up, face half hidden. He checked the lot once, then pulled a key card from his pocket and swiped it on a small gate reader. A green light blinked. Shaw's jaw clenched. "That's the same kind of card." The worker rolled the cart toward the freight car and started loosening straps with hands that moved like he had done it before. Too smooth. Too calm. Ethan waited until the worker leaned forward. Then he moved. 2 steps, fast and silent. He didn't tackle. He didn't swing. He grabbed the worker's wrist, turned it, and pinned him against the cart with controlled pressure, keeping the man's head from smashing into metal. The worker jerked, startled. He tried to reach his waistband. Ranger stepped in. No bark, no teeth, just presence. The worker's eyes snapped to the dog, and something in him broke. He went stiff, breath shallow, like he had just realized the odds had changed. Ruiz and O'Neill appeared on the left, weapons drawn but steady, voices low. "Hands up," Ruiz commanded. "Now!" The worker's hands rose. His hood fell back, revealing a shaved head and a face slick with sweat despite the cold. A small scar cut across his right eyebrow, giving him a permanent look of irritation. O'Neill cuffed him. Shaw moved straight to the bundle on the cart. She cut the strap carefully, like she was afraid of what a rough motion could do. Inside was not equipment. It was a crate. The kind used for shipping fragile items. The kind no one should ever use for a living child. Shaw pried it open. A whimper rose, thin and weak. A little boy, maybe 3, curled inside with his knees to his chest. Dark hair stuck to his forehead. His eyes were wide and glassy. Tape had been pressed over his mouth, damp at the edges from breath. Ethan's stomach twisted hard. Ruiz turned away for half a second, like she needed the wall to stay upright. Shaw's hands were gentle as she peeled the tape. "You're safe," she said, voice steady even as her eyes shined. "You're safe." The worker in cuffs started laughing. It sounded wrong in the snow. "You think you won," he said, voice shaky. "You're just late." Ethan leaned in close, calm like stone. "Late for what?" The worker's eyes darted away. "For the real one." Shaw's phone buzzed again. The tracker dot on the screen wasn't stopping. It was splitting. 2 new pings appeared, moving in different directions. Shaw looked up at Ethan, and the floodlights made her face look carved from ice. "We just found one," she whispered. "How many are still moving?" The man everyone trusted. 2 tracker pings moved through the snow like twin heartbeats trying to disappear. Shaw stood under the floodlights with her phone held close, the glow painting her cheekbones hard. "One's heading north," she said, "toward the interstate. The other is circling back toward the city." Detective O'Neill swore quietly. Diversion. Ethan's mind snapped into a clean, practical grid. 2 moving targets, limited units. A yard full of civilians just beyond the fence line. A child already rescued, and another one somewhere in the dark. "Split smart," Ethan said. His voice stayed even, like calm itself could keep the night from shattering. "You take the northbound. Ruiz and I take the one circling back. Ranger stays with me." Shaw looked at him for half a second, measuring. Then she nodded once. "You don't chase. You intercept." Ethan nodded back. "That's the plan." O'Neill motioned to Ruiz. "We move now. Quiet. No lights until we're in position." They loaded the rescued boy into a heated unit with medics, then slipped out in 2 directions. Tires crunched over snow, and Chicago's winter swallowed the sound. Ruiz drove this time. She was steady behind the wheel, eyes sharp, jaw tight. "Where do you think the second ping is going?" Ethan watched the map on Shaw's shared feed, then glanced at the surrounding streets. "Not random," he said. "It's going somewhere that looks normal. Somewhere no one questions." Ruiz's hands tightened on the wheel. Like a charity event. Ethan's gaze flicked to a billboard across an overpass, half covered in snow. A smiling man in a suit stood beside a logo. Midwest Family Journeys. Under it, cheerful lettering promised, Holiday Hope Drive, tonight. Ethan felt something cold settle behind his ribs. That, he said. Ruiz followed his eyes and went pale. No. Yes, Ethan said. That's how you hide. You wrap it in good intentions. Ranger shifted in the back seat, ears up. He hadn't seen the billboard. He didn't need to. The tension in Ethan's voice was enough. They pulled up near a community center on the edge of the loop, lights glowing warm through frosted windows. Cars lined the street. People in winter coats carried donation boxes inside, laughing, shaking snow off hats. It looked like a postcard. It also looked like cover. Ruiz parked 2 blocks away, behind a delivery van. She killed the engine. Ethan checked the surroundings with the same precision he'd used in the corridor. Entrances, exits, security, blind spots. He adjusted the angle of his parka collar against the wind, flannel peeking beneath, then stepped out with his boots landing quiet on packed snow. Ranger came out beside him, black and tan coat catching the streetlight. He didn't pull, he didn't bark. He scanned the sidewalk and the air, tasting the world. They moved on foot. Ruiz spoke softly into her radio, coordinating with units Shaw had redirected. We have eyes on the event. Possible transfer in progress. Do not spook civilians. Ethan watched the door. A volunteer table. A banner that read, Good neighbors, bright futures. The kind of words that made people trust. Inside, he could see a man shaking hands near the stage. Mid-50s, tall, fit in a polished way. Silver hair combed perfectly back. A smile that looked practiced and expensive. Martin Caldwell. Ethan didn't know his name yet, but he knew the type. Men like that didn't just walk into rooms. Rooms made space for them. A woman in her 40s stood beside Caldwell, petite with sharp cheekbones and a neat black bob haircut. She wore a tailored coat and a headset, moving with the brisk purpose of an organizer. She pointed, whispered, directed staff like a conductor. Caldwell laughed, placing a hand on a donor's shoulder like a blessing. Ranger's head tilted. His nose twitched once, then again. The dog's posture changed subtly, not rigid, but intent. He smells it, Ethan murmured. Ruiz glanced at Ranger. What? Ethan's gaze stayed on Caldwell. Kids, or something that was near them. They didn't charge in. They didn't play hero. That was how people got hurt. Ethan and Ruiz edged along the side of the building, keeping the warm crowd between Caldwell and their approach. A service door sat near the back, half-shadowed behind stacked boxes labeled toys and blankets. A delivery schedule clipboard hung on a hook. Ruiz whispered, "If they're moving someone, it won't be through the front." Ethan nodded. He saw fresh tire tracks leading to the rear alley, too straight, too recent. He watched a man step out the back door. Late 20s, shaved head, scar across his eyebrow. The mule from the lot. He pushed a wheeled bin covered by a tarp, the kind used for event supplies. He moved fast, eyes down, pretending he belonged. Ranger's body tightened. He stepped forward, silent as a shadow. Ethan put a hand out, stopping Ranger with a light touch near the shoulder. "Not yet," he whispered. Ruiz leaned in. "We take him. We take what he's carrying," Ethan said. "He's not the end." The mule rolled the bin toward a white cargo van parked in the alley. No logo. No plates visible from this angle. The rear doors were cracked open, like a mouth waiting. Ethan counted the seconds, timed the spacing of passing pedestrians at the alley mouth. He waited for the moment when no civilian would turn and see a struggle. Then he moved. 2 strides, controlled. Left knee stabbed him, but he didn't break rhythm. He caught the mule's wrist, twisted it inward, and pinned him to the van with a firm, clean motion. Ruiz stepped in immediately, cuffing him before he could shout. Ranger stood at Ethan's side, close enough to be felt. The mule glanced at the dog and went still, fear making him obedient faster than any command. Ruiz peeled back the tarp. Inside the bin, under a layer of plush toys, was a small, child-sized carrier. Ethan's breath caught. Ruiz's hands shook as she opened it. A toddler girl, maybe 2, blinked up at them, eyes glossy with fear. Her cheeks were stained with dried tears. A soft hat covered most of her hair. She didn't cry. She looked too tired to cry. Ranger lowered his head slightly, sniffed once, gentle. The girl's gaze locked onto the dog, and something in her expression shifted. Not trust, not yet, but a flicker of recognition that the world had changed. "Lily," Ruiz whispered, voice breaking. Ethan's jaw clenched hard. He felt rage rise and forced it down, the way he'd learned to do when anger could get someone killed. He handed the carrier carefully to Ruiz. "Go," he said. "Get her warm. Now." Ruiz didn't hesitate. She turned and moved fast, radio already in hand, calling medical. She ran, not as a cop chasing a suspect, but as a woman carrying someone fragile. Ethan stayed. Because Caldwell was still inside, smiling under the lights. The mule in cuffs trembled. "You don't know who he is," he muttered. Ethan leaned close, voice low. "I know he hides behind good deeds." Ranger's ears pricked. The back door of the community center opened again. The organizer woman with the bob stepped out, phone pressed to her ear. Her eyes snapped to Ethan, then to the mule. Her face hardened. She turned to run. Ethan moved first, intercepting her path without tackling. He stepped into her line, forcing her to stop or collide. "Don't," Ethan said, calm as stone. She froze, then tried to slip around. Ranger shifted one step, blocking silently. The woman's breath hitched. She raised her hands slowly, as if realizing the dog was a wall she couldn't talk her way through. O'Neill's voice came through Ethan's earpiece. "Shaw's team grabbed the northbound. It's Caldwell. We're coming." Ethan felt relief and refused to let it loosen him. Relief made people sloppy. He guided the woman back toward the alley wall, keeping distance, keeping control. No unnecessary force. No spectacle, just containment. Then the front doors of the community center swung open, and Martin Caldwell stepped into the cold, still smiling, as if he'd come out to greet a friend. Up close, he looked even more polished. Mid-50s, tall, neatly trimmed silver stubble, perfect teeth. He wore a tailored wool coat over a suit, the kind that never met real weather. His eyes were pale blue, calm in a way that didn't match the night. "Officer," Caldwell said smoothly, gaze flicking to Ruiz's badge as she returned with backup behind her. "What seems to be the problem?" Ruiz's voice was shaking, but her words were iron. "We found the child in your delivery bin." Caldwell's smile didn't break. "That's absurd. This is a charity drive." Shaw arrived then, stepping from a black SUV with the same quiet intensity she'd carried all night. She held up her phone. "Your tracker pings say otherwise." For the first time, Caldwell's eyes narrowed. Ethan watched that micro-shift, the tiny crack in the mask. O'Neill and 2 more units moved in, surrounding Caldwell without crowding him. A clean ring. No chaos. No chance to bolt. Caldwell's gaze slid to Ethan. "Who are you?" Ethan didn't puff up. He didn't posture. "Someone who doesn't like bullies," he said. Ranger stood beside him, steady, silent, a living warning. Caldwell's smile finally faltered. Not because of the cops, because of the dog. Because the dog didn't care about his suit, his donors, his speeches. The organizer woman started to sob. Caldwell looked around, calculating, then sighed like a man annoyed by inconvenience. "You have no idea how many people you're hurting," he said. Shaw's voice cut through, cold and final. "You hurt children. That's all that matters." They cuffed him without drama. No shouting, no beating, no hero pose. Just a man in a nice coat being walked into the snow. Later, at the hospital, the fluorescent lights felt gentler than the ones in the service corridor. Lily sat wrapped in a warm blanket, cheeks still red from cold, a stuffed dog tucked under her arm. Her mother arrived like a storm, mid-30s, hair thrown into a messy ponytail, face raw from days without sleep. She dropped to her knees the moment she saw Lily. "Oh, baby," she sobbed, pressing her forehead to her daughter's. "Oh, my baby." Lily stared for a second, then reached up with shaky hands and touched her mother's face like she needed proof. Ethan stood near the door, not wanting to intrude. His parka still held the smell of snow and diesel. His flannel collar felt scratchy against his neck. His knee ached like a reminder that he wasn't 25 anymore. Ranger sat at his feet, ears relaxed for the first time all night. The dog watched Lily and her mother with soft eyes, as if absorbing the moment. The mother looked up and saw Ethan. She saw the tired strength in his face, the stiffness in his stance, the quiet way he tried to disappear. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know how to." Ethan shook his head once. "You're here," he said. "That's what matters." Lily's gaze drifted past her mother and landed on Ranger. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then Lily lifted her small hand and gave a hesitant wave. Ranger didn't move forward. He just wagged his tail once, slow and gentle, like a promise that the scary part was over. Outside, Chicago kept snowing. But inside that hospital room, warmth finally had a place to land. Ethan looked down at Ranger and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for years. In a city full of noise, one quiet dog had helped bring a child home. Some nights, evil doesn't roar. It blends in. It wears a friendly smile, stands under warm lights, and counts on the world being too busy to notice. But God has a way of placing guardians where we least expect them. A steady man with a wounded knee can still walk straight into danger if his heart is anchored in what's right. And a loyal dog doesn't need words to speak truth. Ranger's silence was not weakness. It was wisdom. The kind that feels like a miracle when it saves a child at the exact second hope is fading. If this story left you with a lump in your throat, let it also leave you with a promise. Pay attention. Trust the small warnings. Protect the vulnerable. And remember that courage is often quiet, faithful, and loyal enough to stand its ground in the cold. Share if you believe in angels with paws. Comment Amen to bless our veterans. Subscribe for the next story.